In this video, we will be building on your understanding of data analysis. So in the previous video, you had been introduced to the concept of data analysis by analyzing summative assessment data scores. In this specific example, we have a more thorough provision of data, as we can see here. So if we take a look at the data, we're further building on what we have analyzed. So here we see our post-assessment scores, and these are coming from the previous data set. So these are aligned to that specific data set. You'll notice that now we have also added our pre-assessment scores in addition to our post-assessment scores. So these scores are originating from an assessment that is made up of 10 questions. So usually whenever we develop assessments, we want to make sure that our assessments provide an accurate representation of our students' understanding. So specifically, we want to make sure that our, our assessments are not just lower level questions, they're not just higher level questions, but rather, they provide a pretty good analysis or a pretty good composition of low level questions as well as high level questions. Now, the composition of your assessment will be dependent on your goals. What are your goals for that lesson, that particular unit, your student population? So for this particular example, the assessment is essentially made up of 10 questions, and the distribution for the assessment involves 5 questions that are lower level questions, and these 5 questions are aligned to learning goal 1, which is your lower level learning goal, right? So recall Bloom's taxonomy. So these are going to be your lower cognitive level. In contrast, we have learning goal 2, which is assessing a higher level learning goal, right? Which is going to be your second learning goal, which is higher level. So this is where the questions are coming from. This is where the assessment data is originating from. Here you're going to see learning goal 1 and learning goal 2. So as you can see as well, we also have our pre-assessment and our post-assessment scores. These are color-coded intentionally because, as you can see, the pre-assessment total score, so this score here, for example, is a 40. So this particular student, and you'll see here we have a 40 here and a 40 here. Let me look at a different example. So we have 3. Okay, so this is a better example here. So you'll notice that our pre-assessment is a 40, and then you'll see, well, wait a minute. So just so you all know, these scores are going to be coming from a combination of the questions that were for learning goal 1 as well as the questions that were assessing learning goal 2. So again, remember, our assessment is not just going to have low level questions, nor is it just going to have high level questions. In this case, our assessment was made of 10 particular questions, with 5 of these questions assessing learning goal 1 and 5 of these other questions assessing learning goal 2. So if we look at this particular example, this student, student number 5, earned a grade of a 40 for the pre-assessment. So you'll notice here, for instance, you'll say, well, wait a minute, we have a 20 here for learning goal 1 and we have a 60 here for learning goal 2. Well, that doesn't make sense. How is this student's grade of 40? Well, let's go ahead and look at that. So remember that we had mentioned that a student will have this grade, right? Of course. So in this particular example, we know that for a student to have gotten a 40, that means that the student had to have gotten 4 out of 10 questions correct, right? Because each question is worth 10 points. So this particular student earned a 40. So looking at the distribution of the questions that the student got correct, we see that The student got 1 out of 5 questions correct for learning goal 1 and 3 out of 5 questions correct for learning goal 2. And usually, sometimes we tend to see students do a little bit better on these, but perhaps the student may have had some prior knowledge, right? So there's things that we can certainly unpack here. But essentially, right, the idea is that this student has a 40, and this is coming from these right here. So let's say, a student got 5 out of 5, then what grade would we have here? This should be 100. So meaning that for learning goal 1, this student got 100% of the questions correct, right? So in this case, this student only got 1 out of 5 questions correct, which is the reason why we see a score of 20 here. Same concept over here. Now these here are assessing learning goal 2. So this particular student earned 3 questions out of 5 correct, which is the reason why we have a score of a 60% for learning goal 2 for the pre-assessment. So that is how we're able to break these down. The same concept will go for the post-assessment score. So as you can see here, student 1 earned a post-assessment score of a 90. So we can see that here, this score of a 90 is made up of 5 out of 5 questions correct and 4 out of 5 questions make correct. So another way that you can make the determination is you can count these, right? So we have 5 and 4, so that is 9, so that's a 90, right? And again, you might have a question of, well, wait a minute, isn't the score 90? Why are these grades different? Well, the reason why they're different is because, again, our test, our assessment is made of 5 questions that are low level, that are assessing learning goal 1, and 5 questions that are high level, that are assessing learning goal 2. And that's just the way that we broke down the questions, right? Again, you always have that decision in terms of how you will want to, break up your assessment questions, right? But ultimately, you should want to make sure that your assessment provides rigor, right? It is rigorous for the students, and it does provide representative questions that are not just low level, but rather, evenly balanced between a low level and high level questions. So again, here this particular student got 5 out of the 5 low level questions correct. So that is the reason why this particular student had a grade of 100 for our assessment of learning goal 1. So we could probably say, this student, when we're analyzing this, right? Because again, the whole point of this is not just to simply create charts, right? But rather, as teachers, it's important for us to analyze data and use this data analysis to inform our decisions, right? And determine how it is that students are doing, identify any potential learning gaps, and inform re-engagement lessons. So in this case, this student earned 5 out of 5 questions correct, so they had a grade of 100. So, we could say that this student, we could see that there is definitely growth between the pre-assessment of 40 towards the post-assessment. So we could probably say, this lesson was quite successful as evidenced by the growth here. Now, we can also see here that for learning goal 2, which is again our higher learning goal, we had a score of a 40, and afterwards we had a score of an 80. So we also did see growth, particularly here. Now, the next thing that we're going to be doing will be to illustrate this, right? Because, of course, looking at this, it can certainly be quite daunting, specifically with the immense amount of data that we have for these 21 students. And again, these 21 students are the same students that we had analyzed in a previous video. The difference is that now we have much more data that will better inform our re-engagement lesson. So for example, if we find that more students had issues with a lower level objective, or we find students had issues with a higher learning objective, then we might want to engage students more meaningfully, more intentionally geared towards closing the gaps for that particular learning goal. So let's see here. So the first thing that we're going to be doing will be to visualize. And again, this here is going to be our whole class data, hence the title whole class. Eventually, we will go ahead and add tabs to illustrate each particular group. So for this particular one, we are going to illustrate our whole class data. So we will begin, and again, we are looking at this differently, specifically looking at the growth for Learning Goal 1 and the growth for Learning Goal 2. So we're comparing those, and specifically, what are we comparing? Well, we are comparing the percentage for the pre-assessment and the post-assessment, so we can make a determination in terms of, did we have growth, right? So let's go ahead, and the first thing that we're going to do will be to illustrate our chart, right, that will help us compare each particular student. Now, before doing this, right, something that you want to consider is that when you are making your charts, you want to ensure that you don't have these labels next to the student, just so that your data can look cleaner, right, and as well as try to eliminate any potential deficit views to the particular students. In this case, the students here are labeled, just to help your copying and pasting towards this other side. So to make things easier, we're just going to go ahead and create our tabs here. That way we can just delete these. So you can go ahead and do this if you're following along. So we're going to go ahead and add a sheet, and we're going to name it Gifted and Talented. We're also going to add another sheet, and we will name this EBELL for our Emergent Bilinguals. We will add another sheet for our SPED students, and we'll add another sheet for our Section 504 students, and we will finally add another sheet for our individual students. So here, of course, we're going to start with our Gifted and Talented. So starting off, you can go ahead and highlight everything. That way you can keep the formatting. And we're going to copy that over to all of these sheets, like so. Okay, and very simple. The next thing, as you might imagine, is we are going to bring over our Gifted and Talented students. So as you can see, since these are already labeled, it is much easier to do this, compared to going over here and looking for them, right? But keep in mind, you will want to delete the labels when you are developing your charts. So let's go ahead and copy. We have students 16 and 18, so let's copy them over. Their data over here, so let's copy student 18. Just gonna format things a little bit here. Okay, we'll go to our EBELL learners, and these are students 3, 7, and 11. So student 3. I'm just going to hold command that way, and you can do this trick as well, and that will hold on to these. So student 7 and student 11. So we're just going to click on copy, and we're going to bring our students over here and format this a little bit. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the same thing for our SPED students. So our SPED students are students 9, 14, and 17. So control copy and then just click on command. (14) and 17. Oops. command, oops, sorry about that. 14 and 17. And we're just gonna click command. I don't think it copied. Okay, let's try that again. So we have 9, 14, and 17. Copy, press command, select it, and 17. And then command copy, command paste, and here we have our students. Okay, and then 504. So we're going to select our students, which are 12 and 19. Copy, select command, command copy, command paste, and then here, you can select your individual students. So that will be a matter of the ones that you select for your particular re-engagement lesson. So let's go ahead and engage in our data analysis. So now that we have already copied everything over, right, we're just going to go ahead and delete these labels, because if you'll notice that on your particular charts, you're going to see these labels, right? And and we can definitely go into unpacking all of this. But essentially, we don't want to visualize the data and have labels for our students. So we know that labels can certainly play a negative effect on students' experiences, educational experiences. And as I'm sure you also have seen, they can also help identify the students who have special needs, right? As well as particular supports for the students. So it goes both ways. So we're going to go ahead and just clean up our data in this manner. So now that we have done that, we're going to go ahead and proceed to engage in the creation of charts that will help us visualize the comparison between scores, pre-assessment scores, and post-assessment scores for Learning Goal 1. So let's do that, exactly that. So we want to make sure that each one of these is labeled with our student's name. So the first thing that we're going to do is going to be to select this, and we're going to click Command. We're also going to select our pre-assessment as well as our post-assessment, holding on to the Command key. So now we're going to go ahead and go to Insert, Chart, and here is our chart. As you can see here, we have our stacked column chart. Because this is a comparison, I feel that our side-by-side column chart will help us better be able to compare this, right? So now, again, we want to ensure that our minimum and our maximum accurately reflect the maximum score, which in this case our maximum score is 100, and we can see that illustrated there really well. So now we're going to go ahead and go to customize. We want to write a title for our chart, so we're just going to go ahead and name something that will convey the message about what it is that we are visualizing. So in this case, a potential chart title could be Whole Class Pre and Post Assessment Comparison for Learning Objective 1. And we can name this, right? Of course, you can also change this. Our legend, let's go ahead and put that to the side. And here, of course, you can go ahead and have your particular legend, right? So our blue will be our pre-assessment score, and our red is our post-assessment score. Now, we also want to ensure that we have titles on both of our axes. So let's go ahead and go back to customizing. Let's go back to our chart and axis title. So here, now we're going to look at our horizontal axis subtitle. So that will be here. So we're just going to say students. And then we want to focus on our vertical. So we will say score. And we see that in that manner. So there we go. That is our chart. And of course, you can always center this, right? So, and as well as the legend, right? If you just don't like the way it looks there, you can always change the position, right? I think that looks okay somewhat, or wherever you feel is best. So there we go. That is one of our charts, right? That for our pre and our post assessment. I'm going to go ahead and close this since we have already finished this. Eventually, your narrative, you are going to make use of these charts, right? So we'll just put these here somewhere, and you can just copy them literally and just paste them over, right? So we have looked at learning objective 1. Now we're going to take a look at our learning goal 2. And sorry, that could be better. That should be learning goal. We want to make sure that everything is constant. So whole class pre and post assessment comparison for learning goal 2. Or 1. So now we're going to proceed, now that we have done a learning goal 1, we're going to proceed and do the same exact thing for learning goal 2. So we're going to highlight our students, command, our pre-command, make sure you're holding the command, and then now that we have everything selected, we're going to insert chart. Same concept, you have the stacked column chart. I feel like this is better to visualize it. So now we're just going to go ahead and click again, customize chart and axis title. This is our whole class, pre and post assessment comparison. But this one is for learning goal 2. So we're going to say comparison for learning goal 2. And this is our higher level, right? So let's go ahead and center this as such. Now, if you scroll down, we see our legend is up there. Let's go ahead and move that. We'll put that on the bottom. And the first one is our pre-assessment. And the second one is, the red one, is our post-assessment. So double click it. Okay, and then again, don't forget about the representation of the maximum and the minimum, which looks good. So let's go ahead and go back here, and then let's change our title. So we took care of our chart title. Now let's look at our horizontal axis title. That should be students. And let's take a look at our vertical, and that would be score. And we can do this in this manner, right? So that's how simple it is to create these specific pre and post assessment data. Now, of course, you are going to go ahead and analyze these, right? So if you'll notice, we can see that, of course, our pre-assessment is represented by the blue bars, while our post-assessment is represented by the red bars, right? So generally speaking, just by looking at this, we could see that there is an overall growth from pre-assessment to post-assessment, right? And of course, we see some students that had much more higher gains compared to other students, as you can see here. So if we wanted to make this data and quantitatively, right, because again, we are looking at quantitative data, right? You know, these are all numbers, these are all things that we can measure. So if we really wanted to determine our growth from pre to post and look at our average, and we wanted to do that in a quantitative manner, we certainly could do this, right? So if we look at this here, right, let's take a look at this, and we're just going to go ahead and take the average, right? So remember our formula. So here again, I'm just going to name this average. We're going to take our average, so it equals average, right? Remember from the previous video. And we're going to go ahead and take our average here. So we see that our average percent for the pre-assessment was a 43.8, rounding off to a 44. And let's go ahead and do that here. Equals average. And then same concept here, equals average. Because we want to determine the average for all of these. Equals average. Okay, so if we wanted to make this quantitative, we certainly could, right? We could look at the difference, right? So on average, you know, how many more points did we have, right? Did we have any particular growth, right? So we can see that on average, we can say that we had about, let's make this quantitative. So from learning goal 1, from the post to the pre, right, it looks like we had equals this minus this. We had about a 37-point increase for learning goal 1. And if we look at, and you know, of course, you're going to be writing this in your narrative. So these are just some of the tips that you can engage in to talk about your data. And even here, right, for our learning goal 2, we also did have some average growth, right? So we have this minus this. So about 41 points growth from pre to post assessment, which is, you know, pretty good. Now, of course, do we have some students that need more support? Absolutely, we do, right? So again, the idea is that we are looking at this data to, again, make informed decisions. And ultimately, we want to be equitable educators. It's all about equity. We want to ensure that we are helping all students, right? So that is why data analysis is very, very important, you know, to help all students. Another potential chart that you could develop is the pre versus post assessment chart. So you can go ahead and do this by selecting this. And this is, again, not looking at them at learning goal 1, learning goal 2, but rather as a whole, right? So this 40% is representative of their total score for the test, for the assessment, versus these here is representative of their percentage score for the questions aligned to the low level goal and the high level goal, as we discussed previously. Now, if you wanted to illustrate this, you certainly could, right? So we can select, and I'm just, this is just a tutorial, so command, select, make sure you're still holding command, and insert chart. This is a stacked column chart, but we can see that illustrated here. You know, so overall the trend, we can see that there is overall growth from pre to post assessment. You could do the same thing by, you know, making this quantifiable numerically. And again, right, you can absolutely customize the chart. You need to customize the chart. So the vertical axis title can, or the chart title can be pre-assessment, pre and post-assessment comparison. pre and post assessment score comparison, and this is the whole class, so we can illustrate it in that manner. And of course, we have our legend. Let's go back to customize. We still need to look at our horizontal axis title, that would be our students. Our vertical axis title, score. Our legend, of course, you can always move it. You can put that there. Pre-assessment. Post. And post assessment, right? So again, something to keep in mind is, I know that you'll notice here, and this is a frequent, I guess, a thing that students sometimes do, is you'll have pre-assessment, post-assessment, right? So you want to try to make things uniform. So as you can see here, I capitalize this. I'm just gonna change that to keep everything uniform throughout. So that's another thing that we can do to illustrate our charts. So we're going to be repeating the same process for each one of these, for the gifted and talented, EBELL, SPED, 504, and then at this point you're going to be selecting your 3 to 5 individual students that you will be targeting an engagement lesson towards, right? So certainly by looking at this, we will have a very thorough understanding of where it is that students are at. And before I go on to our next sheet, remember I said that you could, if you wanted to, we can know our average. And this is just a little trick. You can bring this formula over by just bringing it over this way. And essentially, right, it is going to be the average here. So you can just copy the formula over. So if you wanted to quantify this, right, as you can see, our average for the pre-assessment was a 37.6 rounding to a 38, and our average was a 76.9 rounding to a 77. So, we did see average point growth, and specifically if you wanted to quantify that, that would be this minus this. So specifically we had about a 39-point growth from pre to post assessment score, which is pretty good, right? But again, we want to make sure that we are targeting all students and that all students are successful. So we're going to do the same process here for the gifted and talented. So let's go ahead and work on our gifted and talented data. So at this point, you would have already deleted the labels, right, just to clean everything up. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to select this here, and we're selecting our pre and our post, and we're going to insert chart in this manner. Now you'll notice that the way the data is represented here is a little bit different, where the blue is representing student 16 and the red is representing student 18. And each one right here, we see that both students earned a 60, so this is our pre-assessment, and this student 16 earned a 100 for post-assessment, and student 18 earned an 80 for the post-assessment, so this is our post-assessment. So we're going to go ahead and rename this, so this would be our GT, student, pre, and post assessment data for assessment comparison for learning objective 1. And of course we can center this. We can always move our legend to the bottom. And let's name our chart title. So our vertical axis title, of course, will be our score. Our horizontal will be our pre and post assessment. pre-assessment versus our post-assessment. So by looking at this, we can see that this will provide us with our pre-assessment and this will provide us with our post-assessment information. So okay, so for this second one, because this is saving the information, and again, we are working on Google Sheets, we're going to go ahead and select our pre and our post, and we're going to click on Insert Chart, and here we go. So again, same concept. Student 16 is blue, and student 18 is red. So, and same concept here. Our title will be similar. However, this is not for learning. And again, I keep saying objective. It should be learning goal 2. So again, we're gonna correct that here, and that is our higher level goal. So same concept here. Our grid line, our maximum and minimum look good. So we're just gonna go ahead and label these. So this would be student 16, and this would be student 18. Okay, and we're gonna go ahead and proceed. So let's move this to the bottom, and let's go ahead and insert our axis title. So our horizontal axis title will be the same thing, pre-assessment versus post-assessment, and our vertical axis title, this one, will be score. And there we go. So we see that here for learning goal 1 and for learning goal 2. And then as well as, just like we did over here where you can quantify the growth for each particular one, you certainly can, right? You would first start by taking your average. So equal average of these two, well, that's a 60, that's easy. Same thing here, equal average of these equals average of these, and equals average of these. And once you do that, you can always, if you have it right there, you can just bring it over. Like so. So again, you can quantify the growth if you wanted to, right? You could say, well, our growth, we had a this minus this average point growth from pre to post assessment for learning goal 1. For the GT students, same concept over here. You could do the same thing. So this would be this minus this, and say we had an average 75-point growth for pre versus post assessment. So you could certainly do that. So you can look at this, right? I'm just going to go ahead and undo everything because as you can see here, it changed the formatting. But if you wanted to do that, just know that you certainly could. So we are visualizing the data, and then finally, one more thing that you could do would be to select these, command, insert chart. And we see the differences here, right? We have a student 16 that had a 40, and afterwards we have a post-assessment of a 90, and then here student had a 30, post-assessment of an 85. So you kind of see a little bit of a different formatting there. So same concept here. You can certainly illustrate this. So you go to customize, of course, look at the pre and post assessment data. You could absolutely make this chart. So you're going to be repeating this same process for the EB, ELLs, SPED, Section 504 students, as well as the individual students. So I hope you found this helpful, and let us know if you have any questions. So we're most happy to help you. with any questions that you may have. So this is going to be very, very useful for you to engage in your redesign of your re-engagement lesson. So for example, if you are to find that, perhaps you have more learning gaps among your EBELL students, then you would want to look at, did we have more gaps for learning goal 1? Did we have more gaps for learning goal 2? And then from there, make an informed decision in creating your re-engagement lesson. So if you found that for learning goal 1, you had more gaps versus learning goal 2, then it depends on what particular activities you might want to do, but overall you would want to engage the ELPs, right? So help your students practice their listening, speaking, reading, and writing, integrate the SIOP model. Remember that a lot of these strategies will not just help your EBELL students, but usually these strategies are beneficial to all of your students, right? So you certainly want to make sure that you are making an informed decision in your re-engagement.